In the heart of a galaxy torn apart by war, a planet lay in ruins, scarred by endless conflict. The skies above were darkened by the smoke of battles, and the ground below was riddled with craters from countless explosions. This was the backdrop against which Captain John Riley and his elite task force were dispatched. Their mission was straightforward yet fraught with danger: protect the royal delegation of the Zalorian race as they embarked on a perilous journey to negotiate peace with rival factions. Captain Riley, a seasoned soldier with years of experience in intergalactic warfare, knew that this mission was different. The stakes were higher, the risks greater. The Zalorians, known throughout the galaxy for their strategic brilliance, were physically fragile beings. Their strength lay in their minds, not their bodies, and this made them vulnerable in a war zone. The delegation comprised 3 young Zalorian girls, each one carrying the weight of their people's hopes on their slender shoulders. They were brilliant, intelligent, and full of resolve, but they were also fragile, their pale skin and delicate features a stark contrast to the rugged terrain they now had to traverse. The convoy set off under a shroud of tension. Riley's team, a mix of human soldiers and alien mercenaries, moved with practiced efficiency, but the atmosphere was thick with unease. The Zalorians, despite their need for protection, were not entirely trusted by their human counterparts. Whispers of past betrayals and broken alliances echoed in the minds of the soldiers, feeding the growing sense of mistrust. Riley, ever the professional, kept his focus on the mission, but he couldn't ignore the undercurrents of suspicion that flowed through his ranks. As the convoy advanced deeper into enemy territory, the landscape grew increasingly hostile. The once fertile plains were now barren wastelands, littered with the debris of war. Riley scanned the horizon, his instincts honed by years of combat, alerting him to the slightest hint of danger. The Zalorian girls rode in a heavily armored transport at the center of the convoy, their faces betraying nothing of the fear they must have felt. They were on a mission of peace, but peace seemed like a distant dream in the midst of such destruction. The first sign of trouble came as a distant rumble, barely noticeable at first. Riley tensed, his senses on high alert. The rumble grew louder, closer, until it became clear that it wasn't just the sound of the convoy's engines. Something was approaching, something large and potentially dangerous. Riley issued a command, his voice calm but authoritative, and the convoy slowed to a halt. The soldiers dismounted, weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of the enemy. Riley approached the Zalorian transport, his expression grim. "We need to be ready for anything," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The girls nodded, their expression stoic, but Riley could see the flicker of fear in their eyes. They were brilliant strategists, but this was not their battlefield. Their minds were their greatest weapons, but here, in this desolate place, it was brute force and survival instincts that mattered most. As the convoy resumed its journey, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. His team moved with precision, but there was a palpable tension in the air, a sense that something was about to go terribly wrong. The mistrust between the humans and the aliens only added to the unease, creating an atmosphere ripe for disaster. And then, as if to confirm Riley's worst fears, the sky above them erupted in a burst of light. An explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, sending shockwaves through the convoy. Riley's instincts kicked in, and he barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. The soldiers scrambled for cover, weapons drawn, as the convoy came under heavy fire. In the midst of the chaos, Riley noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. One of his own men, a seasoned soldier he had trusted with his life, was acting suspiciously. The man's movements were too calculated, too deliberate. Riley's mind raced as he pieced together the clues. This wasn't just an ambush by the enemy, there was a traitor in their midst. Time seemed to slow as Riley locked eyes with the traitor, the realization dawning on both of them simultaneously. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Riley to make his move. With a swift, practiced motion, Riley disarmed the traitor, his instincts taking over. The traitor's eyes widened in shock, but Riley didn't give him a chance to react. A quick, precise blow rendered the man unconscious, leaving Riley to deal with the immediate threat. The betrayal was a harsh reminder of the dangers they faced, not just from the enemy but from within their own ranks. Riley knew that this mission was now more precarious than ever. The Zalorian girls, unaware of the full extent of the danger, were still counting on him to protect them. And protect them he would, no matter the cost. With the traitor neutralized and the immediate threat dealt with, Riley rallied his team. They had a mission to complete, and failure was not an option. The convoy pushed forward, moving with renewed determination despite the losses they had suffered. Riley knew that the worst was yet to come, but he also knew that he would do whatever it took to keep the Zalorian girls safe, even if it meant facing the dangers alone. The journey through the war-torn landscape was a test of endurance, both physically and mentally. The once vibrant planet was now a desolate wasteland, its surface scarred by craters and littered with the remnants of destroyed vehicles. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and the distant echoes of explosions, a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict. Captain John Riley led the convoy with a grim determination, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. His instincts, honed by years of combat, were telling him that something was off. The silence was too eerie, the terrain too exposed. It felt like the calm before the storm, and Riley couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Zalorian girls, though maintaining their composure, seemed to sense it too. They sat in the armored transport, their eyes darting nervously as the convoy pressed on. Riley's suspicions grew with every passing mile. The terrain was becoming more treacherous, the paths narrower, the cover sparser. It was the perfect setup for an ambush, and Riley knew it. He signaled for the convoy to slow down, his mind racing with possibilities. They were too far in to turn back, and the mission's success depended on reaching the negotiation site. But every instinct screamed that they were walking into a trap. His fears were confirmed when the first explosion ripped through the air, shattering the fragile silence. The ground shook beneath them as a massive blast sent debris flying in all directions. The convoy was thrown into chaos, soldiers scrambling for cover as the sound of gunfire erupted around them. Riley's heart pounded as he quickly assessed the situation. Hostile forces from a rival alien faction had ambushed them, their attacks swift and merciless. The ambushers had the advantage of surprise, their weapons raining down from hidden positions in the jagged cliffs that flanked the convoy's route. Riley's voice cut through the din as he barked orders to his team. They responded with practiced precision, returning fire and forming a defensive perimeter around the transport carrying the Zalorian girls. But the situation was dire. The enemy was well prepared, their assault relentless. In the chaos, Riley noticed that the enemy was targeting the transport specifically, aiming to separate the girls from their protectors. His blood ran cold as he realized their objective: capture the Zalorian delegation. Amid the confusion, Riley saw one of his men acting strangely, his movements out of sync with the rest of the team. The soldier, a man Riley had fought alongside for years, was not engaging the enemy with the same urgency as the others. Instead, he seemed to be deliberately avoiding the main conflict, moving closer to the transport. Riley's eyes narrowed as he pieced together the treachery. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut, but Riley didn't have time to dwell on it. He had to act quickly. Without hesitation, Riley pushed through the chaos, making his way toward the transport. As he neared, the traitor turned, meeting Riley's gaze with a cold, calculated stare. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the steely resolve of a man with a mission. He pulled a weapon, aiming it at the transport, but Riley was faster. With a single, precise shot, Riley disarmed the traitor, the weapon clattering to the ground. The man lunged at Riley, but Riley was ready. They grappled in the dust, each fighting for control, but Riley's anger fueled his strength. He subdued the traitor with a swift, decisive blow, leaving him unconscious on the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. The ambush had thrown the convoy into disarray, and in the confusion, the Zalorian girls had been separated from the main group. Riley's heart raced as he scanned the battlefield. He spotted the girls fleeing toward a nearby ravine, pursued by a squad of enemy soldiers. Without a second thought, Riley grabbed the fallen traitor's weapon and sprinted after them. The ravine was steep and treacherous, but the girls had no choice but to descend into it, the enemy closing in fast. Riley reached the edge just as the first of the enemy soldiers caught up to them. He opened fire, his shots precise and lethal, taking down the soldiers one by one. The girls stumbled down the rocky slope, their fear palpable, but they kept moving, driven by the instinct to survive. Riley fought with everything he had, his sole focus on protecting the girls. He knew they were outnumbered, and the enemy was closing in from all sides. But retreat was not an option. Riley's quick thinking and combat skills kept the enemy at bay, buying the girls time to reach the bottom of the ravine. They were now stranded in enemy territory, cut off from the rest of the convoy, but they were alive. As Riley reached the bottom of the ravine, he regrouped with the girls, who were visibly shaken but unharmed. They looked at him with a mixture of shock and gratitude, realizing that without his intervention, they would have been captured or worse. The gravity of their situation hit Riley hard. They were deep behind enemy lines, with no immediate support, and the enemy would not give up easily. But Riley was not one to back down. He knew they had to keep moving, find a way out of the ravine and back to safety. The mission had taken a disastrous turn, and they were now on their own in hostile territory. But Riley was determined. He would do whatever it took to protect the girls and complete the mission, even if it meant fighting their way through an entire army. The air was thick with tension as Captain John Riley and the Zalorian girls made their way through the unforgiving terrain. The rocky landscape was a maze of jagged cliffs and treacherous paths, each step a calculated risk. Riley moved swiftly but cautiously, his senses heightened as he led the girls through the narrow passageways. The enemy was close behind, their relentless pursuit a constant reminder of the danger they were in. The Zalorian girls, though brilliant strategists in their own right, were unaccustomed to the harsh realities of combat. They struggled to keep up, their delicate frames not built for the physical demands of the escape. Riley could see the fear in their eyes, but there was no time for reassurances. They had to keep moving. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the ravine, spurring them on. Riley's focus was absolute, his mind working through every possible scenario. He knew the enemy would not stop until they were captured or killed, and the only way to survive was to stay ahead of them. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, Riley's combat skills were put to the test. He used every ounce of his training to keep the girls safe, his actions precise and controlled. He anticipated the enemy's movements, setting traps and ambushes that bought them precious time. The girls watched in awe as Riley fought off the pursuers with a relentless determination they had not expected. Their initial skepticism of the human soldier's abilities had been replaced with a growing respect, tempered by the realization that their lives depended on his skills. Riley's resilience was nothing short of extraordinary. Despite the odds, he kept pushing forward, never letting up. The girls, who had been taught to rely on their intellect and strategy, began to see a different kind of strength in Riley. His ability to adapt, to think on his feet, and to keep fighting even when the situation seemed hopeless was something they had never encountered before. It was a strength born not just of physical prowess but of sheer willpower, a refusal to give up in the face of overwhelming adversity. As they continued their desperate flight, the trust between Riley and the Zalorian girls began to build. It was a gradual process, forged in the heat of battle and the shared experience of survival. The girls, once hesitant and unsure, began to rely on Riley's judgment, following his lead without question. Riley, in turn, started to understand more about the girls, their culture, their values, the reasons behind their mission. They were not just fragile diplomats. They were warriors in their own right, fighting for a cause that went beyond the immediate conflict. During brief moments of respite, the girls shared snippets of their culture with Riley, offering glimpses into the world they came from. Their society was one of intellect and strategy, where physical strength was secondary to the power of the mind. They valued knowledge, wisdom, and the ability to foresee outcomes, traits that had served them well in diplomatic circles but left them vulnerable in the physical world. Riley listened intently, absorbing everything they told him. He realized that their fragility was not a weakness but a different kind of strength, one that complemented his own. As they talked, a mutual respect began to grow. The girls started to see Riley not just as a soldier but as a protector, someone who was willing to risk everything to keep them safe. Riley, in turn, saw the girls as more than just a mission objective. They were intelligent, capable beings with their own strengths and vulnerabilities. The more he learned about them, the more determined he became to see them through this ordeal. The bond between them deepened with each passing hour, forged in the crucible of danger and necessity. Riley's actions spoke louder than words ever could. He was there for them at every turn, fending off attacks, finding safe routes, and ensuring they had the strength to keep going. The girls, who had been used to relying on their intellect and strategic acumen, found themselves leaning on Riley's physical prowess and unyielding spirit. It was a partnership of necessity, but it was also becoming something more. Riley's unwavering commitment to their safety began to chip away at the barriers between them. The girls, who had been taught to distrust outsiders, found themselves reevaluating their preconceived notions. Riley's bravery, his selflessness, and his refusal to abandon them in their time of need were qualities they had not expected to find in a human soldier. Slowly, they began to see him not just as an ally but as a friend, someone they could trust with their lives. The journey was far from over, and the danger was still very real. But for the first time, the girls felt a glimmer of hope. They were no longer just survivors running for their lives. They were a team, bound together by a common goal and a growing sense of camaraderie. The trust they placed in Riley was complete, and in return, he gave them everything he had. In the midst of the chaos and the constant threat of death, something profound was happening. The alien girls, who had once viewed Riley with suspicion and doubt, now saw him as a protector, a warrior who fought not for glory or recognition but because it was the right thing to do. Riley, who had started this mission with a single-minded focus on completing his orders, now found himself driven by a deeper purpose. These girls were more than just a mission, they were his responsibility, and he would see them to safety no matter the cost. As they moved through the dangerous terrain, one step closer to safety with each passing moment, Riley and the Zilorian girls forged a bond that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. They were no longer just soldiers and diplomats. They were allies, united by the shared experience of survival and the unbreakable trust that had grown between them. The structure loomed ahead, a shadowy silhouette against the bleak landscape. It was old, abandoned, but sturdy enough to offer a brief respite from the relentless pursuit. Riley guided the alien girls inside, his eyes sweeping the area for any signs of weakness or possible entry points. They didn't have much time. The enemy was close, and Riley knew this was where they would make their final stand. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the walls bore the scars of previous battles. The building had once been a fortress of some kind, its architecture alien but still solid. Riley wasted no time, quickly assessing the situation. The structure had several choke points, narrow corridors and doorways that could be used to their advantage. If they were going to survive, they would need to hold off the enemy long enough for the rescue team to arrive. It was a long shot, but Riley had faced worse odds before. He turned to the Zilorian girls, their faces etched with both fear and determination. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice steady. "They'll be here soon. We need to prepare." The girls nodded, their earlier hesitation replaced by a resolve born of necessity. They had seen Riley in action, witnessed his bravery, and now they were ready to fight alongside him. Riley quickly outlined his plan. They would fortify the entrance and use the narrow corridors to funnel the enemy into a confined space, where their numbers would be less of an advantage. Riley would take the brunt of the fighting, using both his human and alien weapons, while the girls would use their unique abilities to support him. The enemy's approach was heralded by the sound of footsteps and low murmurs outside the structure. Riley's heart pounded in his chest as he positioned himself at the entrance, his weapon at the ready. The Zilorian girls took their positions behind him, their eyes locked on the doorway. The tension was palpable, the silence almost deafening as they waited for the inevitable clash. When the enemy breached the entrance, the battle erupted with a ferocity that took even Riley by surprise. The enemy soldiers poured into the structure, their weapons blazing. Riley moved with practiced precision, his training and experience guiding every movement. He fired in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. The enemy, though numerous, found themselves at a disadvantage in the tight quarters, their numbers working against them as they struggled to maneuver. Riley's tactics were brutal and effective. He used the narrow corridors to his advantage, forcing the enemy into choke points where their numbers meant nothing. He switched between his human firearm and an alien energy weapon he had salvaged, using whatever was at hand to keep the enemy at bay. The sounds of battle filled the air, the crack of gunfire, the hiss of energy blasts, the shouts and cries of soldiers locked in combat. But Riley wasn't alone. The Zalorian girls, inspired by his courage, began to use their own abilities to aid in the defense. Their knowledge of alien technology and their mental acuity allowed them to create makeshift defenses, manipulating the environment to create barriers and traps. One girl used a device to emit a high-frequency sound that disoriented the enemy, while another hacked into a dormant system within the structure, activating automated defenses that fired on the intruders. The battle raged on, the enemy pressing harder as they realized their prey was not going to be easily subdued. Riley fought with everything he had, his muscles burning, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he never faltered. The Zalorian girls, though not physically strong, showed remarkable resilience, standing their ground and using their wits to outmaneuver the enemy. As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew more desperate. The enemy kept coming, their determination matching that of Riley and the girls. Riley knew they couldn't hold out much longer, their ammunition was running low, and the enemy was beginning to adapt to their tactics. But just as hope began to wane, the sound of approaching engines reached their ears. Riley's heart leaped as he realized the rescue team was finally here. The enemy, sensing the shift in the tide, redoubled their efforts, trying to overwhelm the defenders before help could arrive. Riley gritted his teeth and pushed back with everything he had, buying the precious seconds needed for the rescue team to land. When the rescue team stormed the structure, the tide of battle turned decisively. The enemy, caught between the defenders and the reinforcements, began to falter. The rescue team, armed with superior firepower and the element of surprise, quickly gained the upper hand. The enemy soldiers, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat, their assault broken. In the aftermath, Riley stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching, his mind still reeling from the intensity of the battle. The Zalorian girls, though exhausted, were unharmed, their expressions a mixture of relief and admiration. They had survived, against all odds, and it was largely due to Riley's leadership and unyielding courage. As the rescue team secured the area and prepared to extract them, the girls approached Riley, their gratitude evident in their eyes. One of them, the leader of the delegation, spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You saved us, Captain. We owe you our lives." Riley, though exhausted, managed a small smile. "Just doing my job," he replied, his tone humble despite the enormity of what he had accomplished. But the girls knew better. Riley had gone above and beyond the call of duty, risking everything to protect them. In their culture, such selflessness was rare, and they would not forget it. As they boarded the transport to safety, Riley was hailed as a hero, not just by his own people but by the Zalorians as well. The bond they had forged in the heat of battle would last far beyond this mission, a testament to the power of courage and trust in the face of overwhelming odds. The transport ship hummed quietly as it ascended through the atmosphere, leaving the war-torn planet behind. The tension that had gripped everyone during the battle slowly eased as the human base came into view, a beacon of safety and order amidst the chaos. Captain John Riley sat in silence, his mind replaying the events of the last few hours. The Zalorian girls sat nearby, their usually composed faces showing the strain of their ordeal. They had survived, but the experience had left a mark on them all. As the ship touched down at the base, a small welcoming party awaited them. Riley was immediately ushered away for debriefing, while the girls were taken to a secure area to rest and recover. The debriefing was quick and to the point. Riley recounted the mission's events with the precision of a soldier, but the weight of what had transpired hung heavily in the air. His superiors listened intently, nodding as he spoke, but there was an unspoken understanding that what had occurred was beyond the usual scope of a mission. After the debriefing, Riley was given some time to rest, but sleep did not come easily. His thoughts kept drifting back to the moments in the ravine, the desperate fight in the abandoned structure, and the bond that had formed between him and the Zalorian girls. He had seen them at their most vulnerable, and they had seen him at his most determined. It was an experience that had changed them all in ways they were only beginning to understand. Later, Riley was summoned to meet with the Zalorian delegation before they departed for their home planet. The girls greeted him with warm smiles, their eyes reflecting a deep sense of gratitude. The leader of the group, who had remained calm and composed throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. "Captain Riley," she began, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You saved our lives. We cannot express how much that means to us." Riley, never one for grand speeches, simply nodded. "I'm glad you're all safe," he replied, his tone sincere. But the leader wasn't finished. "We have much to learn from one another, Captain. You showed us that there is strength in unity, in trusting those who are different from ourselves. We believe that our two races can benefit greatly from a closer alliance." The words hung in the air, their significance not lost on Riley. This mission had been about more than just survival. It had been about bridging gaps between species, overcoming mistrust, and finding common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. The Zalorians, who had always prided themselves on their intellect and strategy, had seen a new kind of strength in Riley, a strength rooted in resilience, courage, and the willingness to protect others at all costs. As the meeting continued, the conversation shifted to a more formal tone, with the Zalorian girls discussing the potential for future cooperation between their race and humanity. They spoke of cultural exchanges, joint ventures in technology, and mutual defense pacts. Riley listened, aware that he was witnessing the beginnings of something significant. The bond they had forged in battle was now translating into diplomatic relations that could shape the future of both their worlds. But beneath the formalities, there was a deeper connection that had been formed. The girls had come to see Riley not just as a protector but as a friend, someone who had risked everything for them without hesitation. They had learned to respect the human way of fighting, of enduring, and of finding strength in the most difficult of circumstances. And Riley, in turn, had come to admire their intelligence, their resourcefulness, and their unwavering commitment to their people. As they prepared to leave, the leader of the Zalorian delegation offered Riley a small token, a delicate piece of their cultural art, intricately crafted and shimmering with an otherworldly light. "This is a symbol of our gratitude," she said, placing it in Riley's hands. "May it remind you of the bond we have formed and the friendship that will grow between our people." Riley accepted the gift with a nod, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice gruff but sincere. He watched as the Zalorian girls boarded their ship, their faces alight with the promise of a new beginning. As the ship lifted off, Riley felt a sense of closure, knowing that he had done his part not just as a soldier, but as a bridge between two worlds. In the days that followed, Riley found himself reflecting on the mission and its broader implications. He realized that what had started as a simple protection detail had evolved into something much more profound. It had shown him the importance of empathy, of understanding, and of seeing beyond the surface differences that often divide species. The mission had taught him that true strength lies not just in physical prowess, but in the ability to connect with others, to find common ground, and to fight for something greater than oneself. The Zalorian girls, now back with their people, would no doubt recount their experiences, speaking of the human soldier who had saved them with a mixture of awe and respect. Their words would carry weight, influencing the way their people viewed humanity, and shaping the future of interspecies relations. The story of their survival would become a testament to the power of cooperation, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope when different races stand together. As Riley stood on the base, watching the stars above, he knew that the mission had changed him in ways he could never have anticipated. It had reminded him of the values he held dear: courage, loyalty, and the unwavering belief in the goodness of others. And as he turned to head back to his quarters, the small token from the Zalorian girls in his pocket, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the knowledge that unity, trust, and understanding could overcome even the greatest of obstacles.